welcome to World Insight. The pandemic, climate change, and conflicts have all contributed to refugees seeking asylum across the Asia-Pacific. Some places like Afghanistan have been particularly hit as foreign aid struggles to enter. Elsewhere, cyclones and heat waves have displaced people from their homes. UNHCR Director for Asia and the Pacific, Indrika Ratwatte, is in Beijing to speak on behalf of refugees in the Asia-Pacific. Let's hear my conversation with him recently. Indrika, what a pleasure to see you.
Very good to be here, Wei. Thank you for having me.
103 million people as refugees worldwide, and you are in the region, Asia region, handling almost 60 to 70% of the global work. What is it like daily for you and your colleagues?
I think, Wei, when you look at the world today, and as you said, such a huge number, a record number of refugees and displaced persons, in the Asia-Pacific we have protracted displaced refugee populations like the Afghans for 40 years, then the Rohingya as well. I think the big challenge for us is to make sure the voices of refugees are heard, that the international community continues to support the people, and most importantly, work on the root causes and solutions. I think these are the challenges that keep us up and make us work towards that end, and it's quite challenging.
Temporary solutions might be easy, and yet on the root cause which you mentioned, I was very much surprised that you have to work on it during the past 40 years, for example, on the Afghan issue. What about now?
The big challenge right now, I think, for the people of Afghanistan, of a population of 40 million, 28 million, according to the United Nations and the international community, is in dire need of humanitarian assistance. And how does one ensure that the most vulnerable of this population is supported? And how does one make sure that the international attention with other competing humanitarian crises, the earthquakes in Syria and Turkey and now Sudan, how do you make sure the attention and the support and the resources and the political engagement remains? So we try to first of all advocate, talk of the needs of the people, and UNHCR has a huge footprint inside staff inside Afghanistan, going daily, staying and delivering for the people of Afghanistan every single day. And regardless of the challenges, I think it is incumbent on us as humanitarian partners and workers to never lose sight that this is about the people of Afghanistan. And that is our responsibility collectively to support them.
It may sound easy, but on the ground every day, how to be motivated after all 40 years of conflicts and uncertainties. And also, we are struggling with so many priorities. How would you make sure that your staff on the ground are energized?
I think one is to make sure that their challenges on the ground to work, to be safe, is addressed. Right now, as you know, there are challenges with the female staff of the United Nations and our partners to work, but every single Afghan woman wants to contribute, wants to work. I can give you an example. I was there 2 months ago, and there was a school that we had built for a primary school for Afghan girls, and we support young assistant teachers to help the main teacher in the classroom. So I sat with these Afghan young women, and I said, how do you find it to come? They said, we will continue to come and support and work despite the challenges, because these are our sisters, these are young Afghans, and we are going to continue to come and support them. And despite the challenges, they are so committed to give back. And many of these teachers were refugees who had returned from Pakistan and Iran. And they were trying to say, we benefited from education in the host countries, so we got to make sure that we give back to our communities.
So they have become your advocates.
Absolutely. And the resilience they show, that despite challenges, to continue working, to continue giving back, I think inspires our colleagues as well.
Maybe it works on the individual basis, but what about the countries that are hosting these refugees? For example, Pakistan and Iran, almost 90% of the refugees from Afghanistan are in these two countries. Tremendous amount of pressure, knowing that these two countries are also having their priorities of struggling at this moment. So how would you, work with these governments and with these countries?
The first challenge, and I'm so deeply grateful, as you said, to these countries, 40 years later, still supporting millions of Afghan refugees. And recently, in discussions with the government of Iran, they still agreed to permit newly arrived Afghan children to go to Iranian schools and access education for free. And Iran is going through economic challenges and big challenges trying to support its own economy, but still makes this gesture. Similarly, in Pakistan, millions of Afghan children go to Pakistani schools and go to Pakistani health clinics. So really to make sure that the international community, as a sign of solidarity and sharing the burden, also supports the host country and the host communities who live side by side with the Afghan refugees for 40 years. And that, I think, is a really important point to keep reiterating to the international community, that despite competing humanitarian crises, you cannot forget the protracted refugee hosting countries.
Right. And some of these countries, for example, Iran, has been struggling in the international media stories, obviously. How much of these aspects of the countries involved working with U.S. partners, how would their cause and how would their actions be known to the rest of the world? I guess that's also one of the ways to encourage them to continue, isn't it?
I think the voice of the host communities is extremely important. When you sit down with the host communities who are sitting, living, sharing their resources with refugees, and for many, many years, and when economic conditions are okay, you can be generous. But the true test of generosity is when you are in a difficult situation and you still try to keep space for refugees. And in a world way, sadly, where protection and assistance for refugees is being challenged by even wealthier countries not living up to these responsibilities, when the global south, 75% of the world's refugees is hosted by the global south, extends this hospitality. It's even more important that they are supported in that endeavor. And the voice of the host communities and their needs cannot be overshadowed by anything else.
Will the global north be able to react on time to be able to contribute their part?
I think everybody has to step up, and I think that's what UNHCR is trying to do with the Global Compact on Refugees, saying it's a shared responsibility, it's a shared partnership, and solidarity has no boundaries, has no borders, has no politics. As you rightly said, Wei, compassion, generosity, dignity, respect, these cross-cut economic, political divides, and I think we should never lose sight of that.
How do you see, the role like China and some of the others that can contribute to providing the solution to the root causes that you have been talking about? And what kind of cooperation also would that need from other parties that should be involved?
I think that's a very complex question you raised.
Indeed.
And I think a couple of parts to it, Wei, if I may. One, I think the role, for example, China as a neighbor to Pakistan, for example, as a host country, advocating on the fundamental principles, which it has done in Islamabad, for example, at the 5th meeting of the three ministers. One, inclusive government. Second, respect to all Afghans and all their rights, including women and children. Third, the sharing of the burden and the solidarity with the Afghan people. I think that, first of all, that articulation is incredibly important. Secondly, when refugee flows happen, it's the neighbors who are impacted. And I think they're also saying in the statement, which is very important, recognizing that Pakistan, for example, has hosted refugees for 40 years, and host countries equally need support is important. And then the interlinked complexities, there's security, trade, connectivity, all part of the equation. And you can't isolate the humanitarian.
No.
And I think the last point, which is also equally important, which China does articulate, is humanitarian assistance, while incredibly important, in and of itself is inadequate to address the challenges of Afghanistan. You need humanitarian development and a connectivity which brings about what, as the Secretary General of the UN says, the humanitarian development peace nexus. They're all connected. And it's regional security, it's regional connectivity, it's trade, it's people-to-people connectivity. I think these messages that have been promulgated by the CSO or the Central Asian Dialogue, China recently also in Islamabad, is incredibly important, because that is the crux of the issue.
We hope after 40 years there will be some hope on the horizon.
Well,
I see the long sigh you had over there. I know the hardship you and your colleagues have to go through every day.
One cannot give up hope, I think, and it is incumbent on us, regardless of the challenges, to provide that hope for the people of Afghanistan and work for refugees, no matter where we are, and to raise their voices and give them voice, agency, and dignity.
I ask this question to many people that I interview, but it is a matter of fact that the world now is pretty much shaped by rhetorics rather than realities. It's very sad, but it's a reality. So how do you handle that, especially when it comes to trust?
For us as humanitarian organizations, just bringing the voice of the people immediately out, and individuals like you and the media play such a critical role in that. Real time, the needs and the challenges. Second is keeping...
But you know, there are things that you cannot say. I mean, either because you are in this official position and therefore you cannot say, or because there are things behind the scenes that you just cannot reveal to the public because you want to make sure your partners are safe and the longer cause can be protected. So you will never be faster than some of the rhetorics, right?
This is true. But I think here the approach we try to take is saying, let us do no harm in what we do. In our political action, in our humanitarian action, if vicariously the politicization results in harm to the people we want to serve, that is not a right action. So that, I think, is the important part of the advocacy. We, across the board, tell people, keep the focus on the people and their needs, and let not your action or your rhetoric compound the problem or do harm to the very people you claim to support.
Your job is pretty much to deal with people. Now, whether that's the refugee you need to take care of, or your partners and future potential partners that you want to work with. But how to communicate, you know? Our ideas about others are usually shaped by what we knew, or what we thought we knew. Yet maybe the reality is different. So how can we go there and be able to see it with sincere eyes and listen with clear ears what exactly is going on, and try to figure out the real nature of the issue? I want to learn from you.
Something we try to do is to really unpack, as you say, the complexities sometimes, because it's easy to say it's so complicated, there are no solutions to it. First, deconstruct the issue. And actually, if you look at it very simply, the fundamentals don't change. The fundamentals are about political willingness to address, being transparent in recognizing the need, and then keeping a people focus. If the political willingness, the transparency of looking at the needs, which are pretty evident, like in Afghanistan today, 28 million people in need. There's no question about food security. There's no question about climate impacts. How do we look at it, and really getting that message across and speaking truth to power? That's important.
We are reaching the middle point of the SDG. UNHCR plays an important role in the world's efforts to accomplish the goals, aspirations of SDG. So from a regional perspective, how do you see we're doing right now?
The region is not doing very well. It's been impacted by, yes, COVID, but before pre-COVID as well, we were falling a bit behind the SDG indicators. The progress on some, but I think really a sincere commitment at the political level and civil society as well. It's easy to say it's only the member states and political willingness. Civil society, partnerships and governments coming together and looking at it as a point of reckoning where concerted civil political partnership has to be really committed. And I think here China also talking about the whole development humanitarian nexus issues and saying one doesn't work without the other and commit to it in a manner which brings a whole of society approach. Because it's not just the government and it's not civil society alone. A whole of society approach is needed desperately because, as you said, the writing's on the wall. And we need really political willingness at leadership level and a whole of society approach to address this if we want to make a dent. If not, I think as a region, as the world, we are looking at the inevitable and not doing much about it.
What a pleasure. Thank you so much for you and your colleagues, your work.
Thank you very much for having me and the support you give to us. Thank you.